Let's listen in here on Live Now from Fox.
Tell us about what happened in the meeting with the president.
Just taking all this in.
Can you talk about your meeting with the president?
I think we had a good meeting with the president, and also Vice President Kamala Harris joined the meeting as well, where we talked about obviously the issue of gun reform and the need to have more gun violence prevention and the work that can be done potentially federally, but also at the state level, because as you all know, in the state of Tennessee, there's an effort by the governor to call a special session, which we completely support, to really address the issue of gun violence or gun violence reform. A couple of other really important things is the framing of this conversation. We started, and this movement really was catalyzed in Tennessee because of a tragedy at the Covenant School. And what's happening now in the conversation that many people, Republicans and Democrats, are realizing is it is a moral issue. It is about our children. It is about our schools and not turning them into war zones. But it is also about communities that are experiencing gun violence every single day, like the communities where I am from and a lot of other communities. And so we're seeing a lot of people in a multiracial, intergenerational democracy, which represented by the Tennessee Three, showing up and being heard. And I think that was really powerful. Justin, Gloria, Representative Jones, Representative Johnson.
Just really powerful to hear the message and to talk about continuing the movement, growing the movement, making sure that we're getting something done, because it's really lit a fire in Tennessee and people are motivated. Students are active and they're showing up, and parents are showing up, and there's just such incredible interest in getting something done, in action. They literally say, you know, we are tired of thoughts and prayers. We want to see action. And I think that that's what they're showing up every day to demand. And both sides of the aisle are showing up every single day. And I think that's a critical piece that we need to be looking at, that a majority of Republicans also want to see legislation to take action against gun violence, to keep our kids safe in their schools. Talking to those moms that showed up the first day of the big protest of thousands, I dropped my kids off at school before I came here, and I'm wondering, are they going to be safe when I go to pick them up? Right. Literally tearing up when they were talking about dropping their kids off at school that morning. So this is critical, and we have got to lift their voices.
What are some of the critical action items you discussed today with the president?
We talked about a lot of items. We talked about red flag laws. We talked about safe storage laws. We talked about assault weapons and what that would look like. So there were a lot of options, and as well as universal background checks and closing loopholes, things like that.
What did the president say to your request for a public health emergency?
So I want to first start by saying that when we went in there, we talked about how Tennessee can be a model for the nation. We came as Tennessee lawmakers, but we didn't just come as legislators. We came as voices of moral dissent as to what happened in our state.
Yes.
And so we lifted this issue above the partisan divide, that this is not left or right, but we talked to the president about how this is a moral issue, an issue of conscience, an issue in the South where we are trying to build multiracial democracy and challenge these extreme forces that, rather than passing an assault weapons ban, they assaulted our democracy, as we saw when we were expelled from the state legislature. And so we talked to the president and vice president about why it's so critical for us to continue to lift up these movements in the South, to continue to lift up this multiracial movement of reconstruction that we're experiencing right now in Tennessee. And as I was sitting in the Oval Office, I saw the bust of Dr. King, I saw the bust of Rosa Parks, I saw the bust of Cesar Chavez, and what they did, all those people did is they acted outside of the political paradigm of what was possible, and they changed political realities. And that's what we talked about. I made a direct ask to the president that sometimes we have to do something outside of the ordinary, as John Lewis did when he sat on the floor of Congress, as we did when we went to the well of the Tennessee State House and demanded action on guns. And so we are going to continue to push and lift up the creative tension needed to get action on this item.
That's right.
Because for so long, this gun violence debate has been stuck in between this stalemate of left versus right. But we talked today about how it's a moral issue of right or wrong.
That's right.
And that is what we're lifting up and will continue to do at the state level, from the State House to the White House. And we didn't come here today representing ourselves. We came here representing the people of our state.
That's right.
The majority of whom across political aisle want common sense gun laws. Republicans, independents, Democrats, they want action. And most importantly, we left here with the mandate of a message that we must protect kids and not guns. That is the message that we'll be going forward with from this meeting.
I have a part two, real quick. The other day, Reverend Barber came to Tennessee and held a march, and as an action from that, we saw you walking into the State House with baby caskets. That was a radical move. Can you speak to the radical nature of that and
Yes.
what you expected an outcome to be?
What is radical? It's to take an action when children are dying, and to pass laws to protect gun manufacturers. What is radical is to have a mass shooting after mass shooting and to say all we can offer is thoughts and prayers. What is radical is a supermajority Republican legislature that is more beholden to the NRA than they are to the lives of our communities. That is radical. What we did was to stand in solidarity with the clergy who are bringing these caskets, clergy who had buried children, clergy who had buried congregants, to say that we can no longer just hide the issue. What this issue is, it's about life and death. And so these clergy who brought these caskets to the State House, what they were doing was trying to show and demonstrate for the world, like they did when Emmett Till's casket was open. Let the world see that in Nashville we had 3 9-year-olds lose their lives. 3 adults lose their lives, and we did nothing about it. And so I would challenge that narrative, and I would say what is radical is inaction. What is radical is a status quo that will put money of special interest like the NRA and Tennessee Firearms Association over the lives of our children. That is radical.
How optimistic are you that enough Tennessee Republicans will support the proposal that Governor Lee backs in a special session? Do you think that's realistic?
The reality is thousands of Tennesseans have marched on our state capitol, mostly young people, advocating for change, because there is a radical silence that is coming from people whose pockets are being filled by the National Rifle Association, the American Firearms Association, who are choosing to care more about what goes into their campaign funds rather than what goes into the schools and into the homes of people who are just trying to live their daily lives. What we believe is that people power can work, and that what we have seen even already from the governor is not because the governor has all of a sudden had some calling or awakening about the issue of gun violence and the need for gun reform. That's been an issue for decades now. We've needed gun reform. We needed to stop the assault weapons from being manufactured in our state. We needed to have universal background checks. We've needed to have red flag laws for a very long time. But what is changing in this moment, which is really important for the state of Tennessee and for the United States of America, is there is a majority that is rising up and speaking and marching and demanding that we do something. And so for the Republican Party, who too often likes the status quo than justice, who too often is okay supporting white supremacy and patriarchy, that's supporting policies that can keep children alive, the message has been very clear from Tennesseans, both Republican and Democrat, white and black, and rich and poor, that something must be done. And in this special session, the expectation is that a law gets passed that can actually protect our communities.
Do you think the Vice President will be able to lead on this issue? She did speak to the Tennessee State House, so do you think that she could lead on this very issue?
The Vice President, and I'll hand it over to Representative Johnson, is an extraordinary leader. She came down to Fisk University and spoke the day after we were expelled from the State House, showing that this was not only a choice to stick with the status quo that supports the NRA, but it was also a threat to our democracy. And so, for sure, she is a leader and can continue to lead in this effort.
Yeah, and absolutely. The people that weren't there, there was so much conversation about that speech that she gave, how powerful it was, and it really just energized and motivated more people, more of the base, more of the people who were on the periphery of this issue, but now they're fully engaged. And they feel like, the White House has made this a priority. In Tennessee, Tennessee doesn't always get a lot of attention. And the world and the nation had their eyes on Tennessee, and it's going to make a difference. We've all got to stay in this together and collaborate and grow this movement, because we are going to get action. And so we're just going to make sure that happens. And we are so thankful that the White House reached out, the Vice President reached out, and understand what is happening and want to help get something done.
I think the thing that it was a key message was that this is not a moment, it is a movement.
That's right.
And that what is going to transform this system is going to be continued people pressure.
That's right.
We come from a state where we have an NRA-endorsed governor calling a special session on guns, something that's unheard of because of people power.
That's right.
Because of young people taken to the Capitol by the thousands. And so I think that what message I think we all were in agreement of in that Oval Office was that this is a movement and we'll continue to push, and that there are steps that can be taken that we'll continue to talk about. But I think it's going to take us not seeing this as just a political inevitability by just a statement, but we have to organize this as a movement. This is our Selma moment. This is a moment in which we have a state that just days after mass shooting chose to expel the 2 youngest black lawmakers rather than take action on common sense gun reform. And it's elevated the issue to the national conversation, their extreme reaction. And that's why we had the Vice President come the day after on Good Friday to come stand in solidarity in Tennessee. You have the President, saying that we were kicked out the State House, and yet we're here at the White House discussing this on the national platform, because what happens in Tennessee, I would say to the media, is going to have national implications. Right. That Tennessee is going to set a model for the nation about transforming this conversation around guns and moving forward to a state and to a society where we value the lives of children over the campaign contributions of the NRA. I think this is really lifting it up to a moral conversation, and that's what we need to head toward.
Can you talk about what that push is going to look like from here?
I'm sorry, could you say your question?
Can you talk about the push that needs to happen, right? This is a summer moment.
Yep.
What is that push going to look like after you leave here? How are you organizing with other groups? What does that look like after you leave the White House? And I also wanted to ask you, you just confronted Representative Zachary, I believe, on the floor talking about implicit bias training in that, and he kind of tried to shut you down when you brought up white fragility. You weren't able to give a comment on that, but can you talk about what you wanted to continue to say?
I mean, we stand here today as representatives of a movement.
That's right.
That when they expelled us, they were trying to expel a movement. And so we are in solidarity with the people of our state. When we lifted up the call for a special session, that was an ask that came from these organizations, particularly young people who said, we cannot leave here and do nothing. And so it's going to look like going to these Republican districts in the next month and knocking on doors, holding town hall meetings, holding rallies in their districts, and lifting up the issue and saying that we're not going to allow you to let this simmer down. That we ended session on Friday early because they thought it would die down, that people would forget about this. But what they don't realize is that we have a month to organize. And we're going to organize and travel across the state and continue to put pressure on them in their districts. And Representative Zachary is an example of how out of touch they are with what's happening in Tennessee. Tennessee is a multiracial democracy. That's what we stand here as ambassadors of, that we want this vision of a multiracial democracy, not this vision of corporate special interest aligned white males who are not aligned with the everyday people of our state.
That's right.
And so we represent the future, which is why they're so threatened by this. We literally, Memphis, Knoxville, Nashville, from one end of the state to the other. Multiracial, multi-generational, multi-faith. And that is the future. And so I want to say to the media is that Southern segregation, they said that they had a saying that the South will rise again. We come here to say that the South will rise anew. We represent a new South that is rising. And that if we can transform the South, we can transform this nation. If we can get common sense gun laws passed in the South, we can get them passed in this nation. And so we hope that the national media will lift up what's happening in the South, because our people are pushing forward a new vision. And I think it's going to be a point where we are on the right side of history, and those who stand against us are not.
And all of these different organizations, as you asked, are wanting to join. What can we do? How do we get involved? More young people who are not connected to organizations are asking the same thing. Kentucky, after their bank shooting happened, they called us, some of those representatives. They showed up at our human chain that went from Vanderbilt Hospital to the legislature, 3 miles, 9,000 people. And several senators and representatives from Kentucky came down in solidarity, and we're going to talk with them back and forth about what we can do. So we've got other states reaching out. We're going to go across our state and wherever we can energize other folks. That's what we're going to keep doing.
Because you cannot expel hope and you can't expel a movement. Go ahead, your question.
We didn't talk about a re-election bid. What we were talking about is we didn't talk about re-election. We talked about reconstruction. We talked about resurrection of a movement around common sense gun laws. We talked about this resurgence of hope in our state that is challenging these extreme special interests. And so we are stand in solidarity. We preach that the Vice President made an emergency trip, something that was unheard of, the day after we were expelled, to stand with us and gave a speech in Fisk Chapel, a historically black college. And so we hope that the White House will continue to stand in Tennessee, but they're showing that they care about what's happening in our state.
That's right.
I mean, I think it's unheard of. I think we're the first state lawmakers to come to this White House under this administration. I mean, they're showing that they stand with us, and by standing with us, standing with our people in our state. And so I think that this is a strong support that we're getting from this White House. The fact that we're here today, that they tried to expel us from the State House and silence us, and the White House responded by coming to Tennessee. Right after the mass shooting, I want to say too is that First Lady Jill Biden was one of the first people to come to Nashville and stand with our community as we're mourning. I represent a part of Nashville, and so our community was grieving. The First Lady was with us there. And so I think that we want to continue to work with this White House and continue to lift up state legislatures like ours who need support, who must be elevated, because what we're dealing with is a form of authoritarianism, is a form of extremism that is harmful for all of our children. And I think that's what we want to continue to lift up.
And Tennessee is often left behind and overlooked.
Say that again. Sorry. Yep. So we will be here at least for another day, and we are talking to some leaders. We'll be talking to some over in the Eisenhower building in just a moment, and each of us are reaching out to connections that we have here, because the work that is going to happen, it won't actually just be what happens federally, although this is extremely important. Obviously, Congress needs to pass an assault weapons ban as they did in the 90s. Obviously, we need expanded universal background checks, these things that are very sensible. But what we are realizing, what we represent, and all the people that we are representing in Tennessee and the people who are asking for justice and change to happen, is also recognizing a lot of this work has to happen at the state level. And the truth of the matter is, the assaults on our democracy, the erosion of our democracy is happening at the state level. State legislatures being run as ours is by Cameron Sexton is much more like a mobocracy than a democracy. And the reality is, if we do not keep pressure on the people at the state legislatures and the speakers and the lieutenant governors, we're going to continue to see lawmakers being expelled for advocating for common sense gun legislation reform. We're going to continue to see people, the two youngest black lawmakers being expelled, but voices of dissent being persecuted by the government. If we do not take a stand and show that in Tennessee and in this country, those types of things are not acceptable. And so I believe that with the people-powered movement that has been resurrected and that is moving forward in Tennessee and across our country, there's reason to have hope and optimism, and reason to believe that these states can change and that our country can fulfill its promises to its children and to the communities that we say that we care about. And that's the oath that we swore. That's the oath that the President and the Vice President swore, to protect the communities and the people in this country. And we need everyone, Republican and Democrat, to be in this movement with us. It is not a partisan issue to say that children should go to school and be safe. It's not partisan to say when you go to a bank, you shouldn't be worried about someone coming with an AR-15 that could do you harm. These things are not Democratic and Republican issues. This is just about who we are as people. And as Representative Jones said, it's a moral issue about what is right and what is wrong. And what we are seeing, and the reason to have hope, is that even in a state like Tennessee, a Republican-red state, we are seeing a governor determine that there is a time and a place and a moment where the status quo cannot work. And we are in this moment, in our movement, and we need more people to continue to join us, and more people, particularly in state legislatures, to push back against the status quo that is harming our communities.
So did you discuss messaging strategies to try to make it more palatable for some of those folks who are not on board with these guns?
No, it's not about palatability, and Representative Johnson, join me, it's not about palatability of messaging. All of us have a moral compass about what is right and wrong. And we know that it is wrong for a child to go to school at Covenant and not come home. We know that it's wrong for three people's parents or grandparents to go to work and not come home because someone had an AR-15. It's not about palatability of messaging. It's about whether or not we have courage and a consciousness in our society and in our states and in our government to act to preserve what we say is important, which is the value of individuals' life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
These people are parents. They're moms and dads. We don't think of them as Republicans and Democrats. They do not. They want to put their kids first. They want to put their kids before guns. And they're coming to the Capitol every day. The last 10 days, there was a group of Republican women that were there in support of passing legislation. And they were inside, they were in the gallery, they were all over. But this crosses all the lines. It is not a partisan issue, because there are as many Republicans coming forward as anyone else. And even I'm the one that lives in deep red East Tennessee, and even in my district, I pulled this very issue. And a majority of Republicans, a majority of independents, and a majority of Democrats favor red flag laws and gun sense legislation in Red Knox County. Mm-hmm. And so it's there. We just need to lift up those voices.
Right. Does it feel like that's getting through to your
Yes, it is. And we didn't have to even speak to them. I think our actions spoke to them, and they joined us. I mean, just because it's the right thing to do, because they're worried about their kids. They're worried about the safety of their communities. And they're going to stand up too. And I think that's something that our supermajority is just missing totally.
What Representative. Your courage.
Hold on one second. We hadn't heard a question from you.
You mentioned Congressman John Lewis. I was wondering, did you guys talk about gun law, about voting rights in your meetings?
We talked about the hope for democracy and this vision of a multiracial democracy, and about how John Lewis did something out of the ordinary when he let us sit in on the floor of Congress for gun legislation in 2016. And when our friend here asked us, what gives you hope? What gives us courage? We come here as Southern legislators in a state that has a tradition of attacking democracy, but also we come from a state where young people led a movement challenging Jim Crow. That John Lewis, we mentioned him, came from Nashville. Diane Nash, Bernard Lafayette, young people. And so I come here 27, 28 as the youngest black lawmakers in that tradition, that prophetic tradition, to say that what we're doing is not just for us, but it's for those generations who are coming up after us. And it's lifting up that legacy of liberation that is also in the South. We come from the South, where it's not just about where the children of MLK and Rosa Parks challenge the children of Bull Connor, the children of these white supremacists. And so we come in that tradition, that prophetic tradition. I work at Fisk University, where we had these young people leading a movement. And so what gives me courage is seeing these young people who came to our state capitol by the thousands, who walked out of class, these mothers whose children had died, who said, we're coming, like people like Shondell Brooks, whose son was shot in my district at the Waffle House in a mass shooting, and said, I'm going to use my grief and transform it into action to demand change, and no matter what happens, I'm going to be persistent and consistent and continue to push the issue. And so I think courage is something that can be contagious. We're seeing it where we were expelled, and it's lifted up a voice of a generation. We come here and we see this Gen Z, who I really believe is going to transform 2024. That their overreaction has launched back a backlash from these young people who are going to transform the political paradigm and the political possibilities of America. And if we can do it in the South is going to set the tone for the rest of the nation. I cannot emphasize that enough, that we come from Tennessee. Tennessee, that they said, is a place that is forgotten, a place that is impossible for change. And we came here, we did something out of the ordinary, and it's lifted up our state to a national profile that is now inspiring courage across this nation. And so I think that is what gives me hope and gives me courage, is that solidarity, that multiracial, multi-generational coalition that we see that is being formed to transform the South.
And the fact that you asked that question, what does that say about the state of our politics? You know, I don't think about it as courage. I did the right thing. You know, we did the right thing, and for me, it didn't take courage to do what is right. I know people see it that way, but for me, I was doing what is right. What is sad is that today, a lot of folks don't have the political courage to stand for what's right and what is right for the 70,000 people that we serve.
Hey, thank you very much, everyone. Our legislators have to move to their next meeting.
I'll just say on the portion about courage, that day our mics were cut off and we were prevented from talking several times. But the thousands of people who gathered, who were making demands in a state where you're told that things won't change, in an institution that prides itself on the status quo more than doing justice. It was seeing the faces of teenagers and high schoolers who were saying, I believe in democracy, and that the people who've been elected in this democratic institution will do right. And so for me, the courage comes from those voices of people who refuse to give up on this country, who refuse to give up on the beliefs and the ideals that we say and profess to have. And so for me and our community, our families, it is the voices of our community who refuse to stop crying out, even in the wilderness, for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Thank you all. All right, let's go.
You were just listening in there to the Representative Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, the Tennessee Three, visiting the White House. Of course, the timeline dating back to that tragic school shooting at the Covenant School. 6 individuals lost their lives, including 3 9-year-old kids. Of course, we want to take you right back out to the meeting with President Joe Biden within the Oval Office of those 3 state representatives. Let's listen into this from earlier on Live Now from Fox.
Everybody in? Well, it's an honor to have you all 3 here. It really is. And I know you got a chance. The Vice President went down to see you. I'm sorry I couldn't be with her at the time, but you know, you're standing up for our kids. You're standing up for our communities, safe communities, and democratic values. That's what it's all about. And you're all 3 of you speak so well about why you're doing what you did and why you continue to do it. And look, what the Republican legislature did was shocking, it was undemocratic, and it was without any precedent. But you turn it around very quickly. And look, we passed the most significant gun laws that have passed in 30 years, but there's more to do. What happened was that we made background checks and, legislation, so-called red flag laws. But I signed the most extensive gun legislation in 30 years. But what I'm more proud of is when I was a senator, I was able to lead the fight with Dianne Feinstein to block the assault weapons, sale of assault weapons, and the number of cartridges that could be in a magazine. And I think we still have to do that. And but on so many issues, you've been out front, and you understand exactly what it's like. It's just tragic to see what's happening in your state in particular, in your city, but also across the country. And nothing's guaranteed about democracy. Every generation has to fight for it, and you all are doing just that. And so, we have a lot to discuss, and with that, I know they're going to be really excited, but I'm going to ask the press to leave. Thank you.
Mr. President, why do you want to